When I left the orphanage, they said I inherited a sealed creamery. What I built changed everything. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to exist, at least on paper. For 2 years, I'd been a ward of the state, a case file, a line item in a budget. Leo Miles, file number 734. And then, with the signing of a single form, I was just Leo. A name without a number, which felt a lot like being a body without a skeleton. Terrifying. The finality of it settled in my bones, a cold weight that had nothing to do with the February wind rattling the window panes of the warden's office. Mr. Henderson pushed a cardboard box across his desk. It wasn't big. It held a few worn paperbacks, a change of clothes, a framed, faded photo of a man I barely remembered, and a toothbrush. 18 years, and it all fit in a box I could carry with one hand. He cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound he always made before delivering news, good or bad. Usually bad. "That's it, Leo. You're aged out. Free to go." Free. The word sounded foreign, like a language I'd heard but never learned to speak. Where was I free to go? To the bus station? To the curb? He handed me an envelope containing my final stipend, $400. Enough to last a week, maybe 2, if I ate nothing but instant noodles and slept on park benches. This was the moment I had dreaded and dreamed of for 2 years. The end of the line. The beginning of what? If you've ever stood on a cliff like that, with everything you own in a small box and no map for where to go next, hit that subscribe button. This channel is for people who know what it's like to start from zero, to build a life from the rubble. We tell the stories that matter. Mr. Henderson wasn't finished. He slid another, more official-looking envelope across the desk. It was thick, cream-colored, with the name of a law firm embossed in the corner. "This also came for you, from a Ms. Albright, a social worker assigned to your grandfather's estate. She's been waiting for you to turn 18. My grandfather, Arthur Miles, the man in the faded photo. He'd been my guardian for the first 10 years of my life, a hazy memory of pipe smoke, calloused hands, and the low rumble of his voice. Then he was gone. A heart attack, they said. I was too young to understand anything beyond the crushing silence that followed. I'd been in the system ever since. I took the envelope. My name was typed on the front. It felt heavier than it should. "His estate?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. I thought there was nothing. Mr. Henderson shrugged, his duty done. "Apparently there's something, a property. She left a card inside. You're to call her." I opened the envelope right there, the flimsy paper tearing under my numb fingers. Inside was a letter from this Ms. Albright, written in crisp, professional language, and a small tarnished brass key attached to a faded paper tag. The tag had one word written on it in my grandfather's spidery handwriting: Creamery. The letter was brief. It stated that as the sole heir of Arthur Miles, I was now the legal owner of the Cold Hollow Creamery, located just outside the town of Northwood. It also mentioned, in a carefully worded sentence, that the property had been legally sealed for the past 8 years and was subject to significant back taxes. A final line advised me to call her to discuss my options, including a standing offer from a development firm. I stared at the key. It was old, ornate, and cold to the touch. A key to a place I'd never seen, from a man I barely knew. A sealed building, a debt, an offer. It wasn't a home. It was a problem. A puzzle box handed to me at the exact moment I had no strength left to solve anything. I clutched the key in my palm, the metal biting into my skin. It was the only thing I owned that didn't fit in the cardboard box. It was the only thing that felt real. The bus station was a purgatory of fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant. I sat on a hard plastic chair, the cardboard box at my feet, the lawyer's letter in my hand. I read it over and over, trying to decipher the hidden meaning between the lines. Significant back taxes. Standing offer. These were phrases from an adult world, a world of consequences and responsibilities I wasn't equipped for. My world, for the last 8 years, had been 3 meals a day, a cot to sleep in, and a set of rules designed to keep me from thinking too hard about the future. Now the future was here, and it was a derelict creamery in a town I couldn't even find on the station's faded wall map. I called the number. A calm, steady voice answered. "Eleanor Albright." I cleared my throat. "This is Leo Miles. You sent me a letter." There was a brief pause, the sound of papers rustling. "Mr. Miles, Leo, happy birthday. I know this must be a lot to take in." Her voice was pragmatic, not overly sympathetic, which I appreciated. Pity felt like a cage. "The creamery," she said, getting straight to the point. "It's yours. But it comes with complications. Your grandfather, Arthur, had it legally shuttered just before he passed. It's been in a state of legal preservation, untouched. The downside is property taxes have been accumulating. You owe the county just over $9,000. $9,000. The number hung in the air, an impossible sum. I had 400. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "So I've inherited a debt." "In a manner of speaking," she conceded. "However, there is the offer I mentioned. North Ridge Development has been trying to acquire that land for years. They're planning a series of luxury vacation homes. Their current offer is $150,000. After the back taxes and my legal fees are settled, you'd walk away with about $135,000, free and clear." $135,000. My mind couldn't even process it. It was a fantasy number, a lottery win. It was a new life, a clean slate. I could go anywhere, be anyone. I wouldn't have to sleep in a shelter or worry where my next meal was coming from. It was the smart choice, the only choice. "Why would they offer so much for a ruined building?" I asked, the suspicion ingrained in me by years of institutional life flaring up. "It's not the building they want, Leo. It's the land. It abuts a state forest and has river access. It's prime real estate for their purposes." She paused. "I can have the paperwork drawn up tomorrow. You could have the money in your account by the end of the week." It was a lifeline, a golden ticket out of the life I was staring down. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper, and this whole mess, the key, the creamery, the ghost of my grandfather, would disappear. But something held me back. That single word on the key tag. Creamery. It was his, the last piece of him on earth. Selling it felt like selling his memory, a memory I barely even had. "I want to see it first," I said, the words surprising even me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Leo," Ms. Albright said, her voice softening for the first time. "I have to advise you, there's nothing there for you. It's a shell. It's been abandoned for 8 years. It would take a fortune to make it habitable, let alone operational. Taking the offer is the sensible path." I knew she was right. But since when had my life been sensible? "I still want to see it," I repeated, my grip tightening on the key in my pocket. I have a bus ticket. I'll be there tomorrow. The bus ride to Northwood was a journey through a landscape of forgetting. The city's gray sprawl slowly gave way to tired suburbs, then to patchwork fields, brown and dormant under a low, white sky. We passed through towns with names like Hopewell and Providence, their peeling Main Street storefronts advertising little of either. For hours, I just watched the world slide by, a silent film of someone else's life. I was an alien, a ghost in transit, moving from one box I didn't belong in to another. The other passengers were a collection of the weary and the transient. A young mother with a crying baby, an old man in a worn-out work coat who smelled of stale coffee, a soldier in uniform staring blankly out the window. None of them looked at me. It was the same invisibility I'd perfected in the group home. Don't make eye contact. Don't draw attention. Blend into the background. It was a survival skill. As the hours passed, the land grew wilder. The flat fields rose into rolling hills, thick with skeletal trees. The houses grew farther apart, with long gravel driveways and plumes of wood smoke rising from their chimneys. This was a different world, quieter, older. The bus groaned up a long incline and then began its descent into a valley. A sign, green with white lettering, flashed past. Welcome to Northwood, population 847. The town was nestled in a curve of the river, a small collection of brick and clapboard buildings huddled together against the vastness of the surrounding wilderness. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a general store that also served as the town's station. I was the only one who got off. The air was different here. It was sharp and clean, smelling of pine and cold earth and something else, snow. The sky was the color of lead. I pulled my thin jacket tighter and looked around. Main Street was 2 blocks long. A diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store, a post office, and a bar. A few pickup trucks were parked along the curb, their engines rumbling in the cold. People who passed gave me a quick, curious glance before looking away. I was new. I was other. I didn't belong. According to the directions Ms. Albright had given me, the Creamery was 1.5 miles out of town, on Old River Road. I shouldered my box and started walking. The pavement gave way to packed dirt. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of my own footsteps and the caw of a distant crow. The last house in town receded behind me, and soon I was alone, flanked by dense woods on one side and the gray, sluggish river on the other. It was beautiful and intimidating, the kind of place a person could disappear into. After 20 minutes of walking, I saw it. Set back from the road, half swallowed by overgrown sumac and tangled vines, was a long, low building. Its white paint was peeling in great leprous sheets, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse. The windows were boarded over with plywood. A large, faded sign hung crookedly over the main entrance. I could just make out the words, Cold Hollow Creamery. This was it. This was my inheritance. It wasn't just a shell. It looked like a corpse. A rusty chain-link fence, breached in several places, surrounded the property. I slipped through a gap, the dry weeds crackling under my feet. The closer I got, the more dilapidated the building seemed. It was bigger than I had imagined, with a main processing building, a tall silo, and a smaller structure that looked like it might have been an office. The main loading bay doors were secured with a thick, rusted chain and a heavy padlock. And on the main office door, there were 2 official-looking seals. They were thick, waxy paper, stamped with the county emblem and a date from 8 years ago. Previously sealed by order of the court. It sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a place that had been deliberately frozen in time. I remembered what Ms. Albright had said about a side entrance. I circled the building, pushing through thorny bushes that snagged at my jeans. Around the back, facing the river, was a smaller steel door, half hidden by ivy. It had a simple lock, not the heavy-duty kind on the front. I pulled out the tarnished brass key. My hand was shaking. What was I doing? I should have been on a bus heading in the opposite direction, with $135,000 waiting for me. I should have been planning a new life, not breaking into a tomb. But I had to know. I had to see what he had left. The key slid into the lock. It was stiff, resistant. I put my shoulder into it, turning with all my weight. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a loud, grating crack, the lock turned. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into darkness. A wave of cold, stagnant air washed over me, carrying a strange, faint smell, sour and metallic, like old milk and machinery. I stepped inside. I left the door cracked open, letting a sliver of gray afternoon light pierce the gloom. I was in what looked like a small changing room. Metal lockers lined one wall, their doors hanging open. A pair of old rubber boots stood in a corner, covered in a thick blanket of dust. I moved forward, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. I entered the main processing floor. The space was huge, with a high ceiling crisscrossed by pipes and steel beams. Dim light filtered through the grimy clear-story windows high above, illuminating a ghostly scene. Massive stainless steel vats, big enough to hold a car, stood like silent sentinels. A complex web of conveyor belts and bottling equipment was frozen in place, all of it coated in the same thick layer of dust. It was a factory where time had stopped. It was eerie, but it wasn't scary. It was just sad. A place of work and life that had fallen silent. I walked the length of the floor, my fingers trailing through the dust on a control panel. I could almost imagine the noise, the clatter of bottles, the hiss of steam, the shouts of workers. I could almost imagine him here, my grandfather. At the far end of the main floor was a door with a frosted glass window. A. Miles, proprietor. The office. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was a small, simple room. A heavy wooden desk, a filing cabinet, a chair, and a calendar on the wall, still turned to March, 8 years ago. Everything was covered in that same fine gray dust, a shroud preserving the last moments of life in this place. And there, sitting in the exact center of the desk, was a gray metal box. It was a simple cash box, the kind you'd see at a yard sale. It was locked. It looked like it had been placed there deliberately, waiting. I tried the brass key, but it didn't fit. I searched the desk drawers. They were filled with old invoices, pens that had long since dried up, paper clips. Nothing. I checked the filing cabinet. It was also locked. Frustrated, I sat down in the dusty chair, the springs groaning in protest. My eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. And then I saw it. Tucked behind the desk calendar, almost completely hidden, was another key. A small, simple one, hanging from a thumbtack. My heart started to beat faster. I took the key, my fingers fumbling. It fit the metal box. With a soft click, the lock opened. I lifted the lid, my breath catching in my throat. I don't know what I expected. Money? A deed? A confession? It was none of those things. The box was filled, almost to the brim, with a stack of envelopes, bundled together with a faded blue ribbon. They were all addressed to me, in the same spidery script as the tag on the key. For Leo, and beneath the letters was a thick, leather-bound ledger. I picked up the top letter. The paper was brittle with age. I could feel the weight of 8 years of silence in my hands. I carefully opened it and began to read. "My dearest Leo," the letter began. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am sorry for that. I am sorry I could not be there to see it. I hope the years have been kind to you, though I fear they have not. There is so much I need to explain, and so little time to write it down. I don't want you to think your old grandfather was a failure who left you nothing but a pile of rust and debt. This place, this creamery, it was my life, and in the end, it was my burden. But I tried to turn it into a gift for you. I need you to understand why I did what I did." I had to stop reading for a moment. His voice was so clear on the page. It was as if he were sitting in the room with me. That low rumble I barely remembered. I could almost smell the pipe smoke. I took a deep breath and continued. "About 10 years ago, when you were just a boy, things got hard. A big corporate dairy opened up a few counties over. They undercut my prices, squeezed my farmers. Business dried up. I got behind. I made a mistake, Leo, a terrible one. I was proud and I was desperate. I borrowed money from the wrong kind of man, a man named Silas Richter. He wasn't a banker. He was a predator. He preyed on good people who had fallen on hard times. The interest rate was impossible. The more I paid, the more I owed. It was a trap, and I walked right into it. The name Silas Richter meant nothing to me, but I could feel the fear in my grandfather's words. This was the system, the antagonistic force that wasn't a faceless corporation, but a man with a name. He started taking pieces of my business, forcing me to use his trucks, his suppliers, all at inflated costs. He was bleeding me dry, and he knew it. He wanted the creamery. He wanted this land. He told me that when I couldn't pay, he would take it. And I knew that when I died, the debt would pass to you. He would come for you, Leo. He would take this place from you for pennies on the dollar and leave you with nothing. The thought of it, it was a sickness in my soul. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let my mistake become your life sentence. I looked around the silent, dusty office, the sealed doors, the legal notices. It wasn't about bankruptcy. It was a shield. So I found a loophole, a strange old county law about disputed estates. I went to a lawyer and had the creamery legally sealed, placed in protective custody of the court until my sole heir came of age. It created a legal wall that Richter couldn't breach. He couldn't foreclose on a property that was in legal limbo. He couldn't touch it. All he could do was wait. And I knew he wouldn't wait 8 years. Men like that are impatient. They move on to easier prey. It was the only way I could protect this place for you. I had to lock it away. It cost me everything I had left to set it up. I knew that taxes would pile up. I knew it would look like I was abandoning you, abandoning everything. But I wasn't abandoning it, Leo. I was hiding it for you. This place isn't an inheritance. It's a head start. It's a chance. Don't sell it to the vultures. They'll offer you a tempting sum. They'll tell you it's just land. don't believe them. This place has bone and blood in it. My bone and blood. Your bone and blood. Fight for it. Your grandfather, Arthur. I set the letter down on the desk, my hands trembling. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the weight of his words. 8 years of resentment, of feeling abandoned and forgotten, dissolved in a matter of minutes. He hadn't left me. He had protected me. This entire derelict, debt-ridden place was an act of love. A desperate, complicated, last-ditch act of a man trying to shield his grandson from the fallout of his own mistakes. The sheer weight of that sacrifice crashed down on me. I put my head in my hands and I cried. I cried for the 10-year-old boy who lost his grandfather and never understood why. I cried for the lonely teenager who shuffled through the system believing he had no one. And I cried for him, for Arthur, a good man who made a bad decision and spent the rest of his life trying to make it right. The grief was a physical thing, a knot in my chest that finally came undone. I cried until I was empty, until all that was left was the cold silence of the creamery and the faint smell of dust. After a long time, I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and sat up. The gray light outside was beginning to fade. I thought about the phone call with Ms. Albright, the offer. $135,000. The sensible path. It was a clean break, an escape hatch from this entire story of debt and struggle. I could take that money and disappear. I could get an apartment, go to community college, build a life that had no connection to Northwood or Cold Hollow Creamery. No one would blame me. In fact, everyone would tell me it was the smart thing to do, the easy thing. But as I looked at my grandfather's letter, at the desperate plea in his shaky handwriting, I knew that easy was a luxury I couldn't afford. Selling this place would mean his sacrifice was for nothing. It would mean letting the vultures win, just as he had feared. It would mean agreeing that this place was just land, just a number on a balance sheet. It wasn't. It was the last piece of him. It was the only real home I'd ever had a claim to. And now it was my turn to fight for it. But how? I had less than $400 to my name. I was up against a $9,000 tax bill and a development company with bottomless pockets. It was impossible. It was insane. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear or numbness. It was anger. A hot, clean anger. Anger at Silas Richter. Anger at the developers. Anger at a world that grinds people down and calls it business. Listen, I need to pause here for a second. If you've ever been handed a problem that felt too big to solve, a fight that felt impossible to win, I want you to tell me about it in the comments. What did you do? How did you find the strength to even start? This community is built on sharing those stories, on reminding each other that we're not alone in the fight. I promise you, I read every single one, and your story matters. Now, let's get back to the creamery. I knew I couldn't do it alone. The anger was fuel, but it wasn't a plan. I picked up the thick leather ledger that had been under the letters. I blew a cloud of dust off the cover and opened it. The ledger wasn't just numbers, it was a story. The first half was a meticulous record of the creamery's finances, and I could see the exact point where things started to go wrong. The slow decline in revenue, the sudden appearance of large, vaguely described payments to SR Consulting. Silas Richter. It was all there, a slow-motion car crash recorded in black ink. But the second half of the ledger was different. The entries were dated in the last few months of my grandfather's life. It wasn't about finances anymore. It was a manual. He had listed every piece of equipment, its condition, and what it would take to get it running again. He listed the names of his best dairy suppliers, families he'd worked with for generations. The Mullins, the Garveys, the Clarks. He wrote notes about their herds, their families. It was a roadmap. But a roadmap is useless if you don't have any gas in the tank. I was still broke. I picked up the next letter from the stack. It was shorter than the first. Leo, it read, if you've decided to stay, if you've decided to fight, then you're going to need ammunition. I couldn't leave you money in a bank account. Richter's people would have found a way to claim it to settle the debt. It had to be off the books. It had to be hidden where only you could find it. I couldn't make it easy, because they might have searched this place after I was gone. But you'll know. You always loved our little game. Remember what I always told you when you couldn't find something? Start where the heart is. Go to the heart of this place, son. That's where you'll find your start. Start where the heart is. The phrase echoed in my memory, a faint whisper from a long-lost childhood. It was a game we used to play, a kind of treasure hunt. He would hide one of my toys and give me a cryptic clue. Where the heart is. What was the heart of a creamery? My first thought was the office. This was the brain, the nerve center. But that didn't feel right. My grandfather wasn't a desk man. He was a craftsman. His heart was in the work. I left the office and went back out onto the main processing floor. The huge, silent vats loomed in the twilight. I walked among them, running my hand over their cold, stainless steel surfaces. The pasteurizer? The homogenizer? The bottling line? They were all vital parts, but were they the heart? Then I saw it, in the center of the room, the largest of all the vats. It had a small brass plaque on the side. The butter churn, established 1952. It was older than the rest of the equipment, made of wood bound with steel bands, though it was lined with stainless steel. It was the original piece of machinery from when his own father had started the business. It was the heart. I walked over to it. It was massive, standing on thick wooden legs. A small inspection hatch was set into the side, held shut by 4 wing nuts. I grabbed one and tried to turn it. It was frozen solid with rust and disuse. I strained, my muscles burning, but it wouldn't budge. I needed a tool. I went back to the office and rummaged through the desk again. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of old catalogs, I found a heavy wrench. I took it back to the churn. I fitted the wrench around the first wing nut and pulled. It groaned in protest, a horrible screech of metal on metal, but it moved. One by one, I worked the 4 nuts loose. They fell to the concrete floor with a series of loud clangs that echoed through the silent building. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Was I crazy? Was I chasing the fantasy of a dying old man? I took a deep breath and pulled the heavy hatch open. I peered inside. It was dark. I used the flashlight on my phone. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the inside of the churn. It was empty, except for a small canvas bag sitting on the bottom. It was an old bank deposit bag, the kind with a drawstring at the top. It was heavy. I reached in, my arm disappearing up to the shoulder, and grabbed it. I pulled it out and set it on the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely untie the knot on the drawstring. I finally got it open and turned the bag upside down. Out onto the dusty concrete floor tumbled bundle after bundle of cash. Old bills, 20s and 50s, held together with rubber bands that were so old they snapped as they hit the floor. I just stared at it, a small mountain of money in the beam of my phone's light. I started counting, my hands moving mechanically. When I was finished, I sat back on my heels, stunned. It was $25,000. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't $135,000. But it was a start. It was enough to pay the back taxes. It was enough to get the power turned back on. It was enough to buy some paint and cleaning supplies. It was enough to be a fighting chance. In that moment, sitting on the cold floor of the silent creamery, surrounded by my grandfather's legacy and a pile of his hidden hope, I made my choice. I took out my phone, my fingers leaving clean streaks on the dusty screen, and I called Ms. Albright. "Leo," she answered, a note of surprise in her voice. "I was expecting your call. Have you seen enough? Should I contact the developer?" "No," I said, and my voice didn't shake. It was steady. It was calm. "Tell them the offer is rejected. Tell them the Cold Hollow Creamery is not for sale." The next morning, I walked into the Northwood County Clerk's office with a cashier's check for $9,217.41. The woman behind the counter, a stern-looking lady with glasses on a chain, looked at the check, then at me, then back at the check. "You're Arthur Miles's grandson?" she asked, her tone a mixture of surprise and suspicion. I just nodded. She stamped the paperwork with a satisfying thud. "Well then, the property is officially clear. It's yours." Walking out of that building, with the receipt in my pocket, felt like my first real breath of free air. The creamery was mine. The debt was gone. Now the real work began. I spent the first week just cleaning. I bought buckets, mops, industrial-strength cleaner, and a shop vac from the local hardware store. The owner, a grizzled old man named Hank, looked me up and down. "You're the kid who took on the old creamery," he said. It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in a town of 847 people. "Trying to," I said. He grunted, then added a box of heavy-duty trash bags to my pile. "On the house," he said gruffly. "Your granddad was a good man. Hated to see that place go to rot." It was the first gesture of kindness I'd received, and it felt like a lifeline. I worked from sun-up to sundown. I filled dozens of trash bags with old papers, broken parts, and garbage. I scrubbed every surface, every wall, every floor. The layers of dust and grime were like geological strata, each one representing a year of neglect. As I cleaned, I felt like I was scrubbing away my own past, the grime of the institution, the feeling of being unwanted and discarded. The physical labor was exhausting, but cleansing. My muscles ached in ways I didn't know they could, but my mind felt clearer than it had in years. I had a purpose. I was building something. After the cleaning came the repairs. I used the ledger as my guide. I started with the office. I patched the leaky roof, replaced the broken window panes, and gave the walls a fresh coat of white paint. The transformation was startling. The small, grim room became bright and clean. I bought a cheap cot and a hot plate. The office became my home. I was living in the creamery, breathing its air, becoming a part of it. The next challenge was the machinery. Most of it was in surprisingly good condition under the dust, but it all needed to be serviced. I didn't know the first thing about pasteurizers or bottling lines. I found a name in the ledger under repairs, a man named Dale Garvey. According to the notes, his family used to be one of my grandfather's biggest milk suppliers. I found his number in the local phone book. I called, nervous, and explained who I was. "Arthur's grandson?" he said, his voice wary. "I'll be damned. I heard someone was poking around over there. I told him my plan, that I wanted to reopen the creamery. He was silent for a long time. "Kid," he said finally, "that's a fool's errand. The world's moved on. It's all big corporate dairies now. You can't compete." "I'm not trying to compete with them," I said, repeating the words I'd read in my grandfather's letters. "I'm trying to make something real, the way he used to." I asked if he would at least come and look at the equipment. He hesitated, then sighed. "Fine, I'll come by tomorrow, but don't get your hopes up." The next day, a dusty pickup truck rattled up the driveway. A man in his late 50s, with a weathered face and work-roughened hands, got out. He looked me over, then looked at the creamery. He didn't say a word, just walked inside. I followed him as he moved through the processing floor, his expert eyes scanning everything. He ran his hand over the churn, tapped the side of a vat, checked the seals on the pasteurizer. After an hour of silent inspection, he turned to me. "Your granddad took care of his equipment," he said, a grudging respect in his voice. "It's old, but it's solid. It'll take some work. New gaskets, new belts, a full electrical check. But it could run." Hope, bright and fierce, surged through me. "Will you help me?" I asked. "I can pay you." He looked at me, his gaze searching. "Keep your money for parts," he said. "I'll help. On one condition. If we get this place running, you buy your milk from me at a fair price, the same price your grandfather paid." "It's a deal," I said, shaking his calloused hand. His grip was like iron. That handshake was a contract. It was the beginning of a partnership. It was the first thread I wove to reconnect the creamery to the community it had once served. The next 2 months were a blur of hard work. Dale Garvey became my mentor. He came over every evening after finishing his own farm chores. He taught me how to break down the machines, clean them, and replace the worn-out parts. He spoke about my grandfather, telling me stories about his stubbornness, his integrity, his obsession with quality. Through Dale, the man in the faded photograph began to feel real to me, a living presence in the building we were trying to resurrect. With Dale's help, I started reaching out to the other families in the ledger. The response was mixed. Some, like Dale, remembered my grandfather fondly and were willing to take a chance on his grandson. Others were skeptical, locked into contracts with the big dairies. But I managed to get commitments from 3 local family farms. It was enough to start. The day we finally got the power turned back on was a milestone. I flipped the main breaker, and with a low hum, the old building came to life. Lights flickered on, one by one, chasing the shadows from the corners. The quiet hum of electricity replaced the dead silence. We tested the machines. The conveyor belts moved, the bottling line clanked, and the great churn turned, slowly at first, then with a steady, rhythmic cadence. It was the sound of a heart starting to beat again. We were getting close, but I was running out of money. The repairs had eaten through most of the $25,000. I needed to get operational, to start generating income, and I needed to do it fast. The final piece of the puzzle was the product itself. In the back of the ledger, my grandfather had written down his recipes, not just for milk and butter, but for his specialty, artisanal cheese and old-fashioned ice cream. The recipes were detailed, almost poetic, with notes in the margins like, "Add the salt just as the sun comes up," and "This cheese likes to listen to classical music." It was the soul of his craft. I decided to start with the ice cream. It was simpler, and I figured it would be an easier sell in the town. I bought the best cream from Dale, the best sugar, vanilla from a specialty supplier. I spent a week experimenting, following my grandfather's recipe to the letter. The first few batches were failures. Too icy, too sweet, not creamy enough. I was getting frustrated, feeling the pressure of my dwindling funds. I was about to give up for the day when I remembered a note at the bottom of the recipe. The secret isn't in the ingredients, Leo. It's in the patience. Don't rush it. Let it rest. Give it time to become what it's meant to be. I took a deep breath. He was talking about more than just ice cream. I slowed down. I followed the instructions precisely, letting the mixture age for a full 24 hours before churning it. The next day, I started the churn. An hour later, I tasted it. It was incredible. It was rich, creamy, and bursting with flavor. It was the best ice cream I had ever tasted. It tasted like hope. The following Saturday, I set up a folding table in front of the creamery with a cooler full of ice cream and a hand-painted sign. Cold Hollow Creamery. First batch free. People from town, curious about the activity at the old place, started to stop by. Hank from the hardware store, the woman from the post office, families with kids. They tried the ice cream, their eyes widening in surprise. They didn't just like it, they loved it. They told me it tasted like they remembered from when they were kids. By the end of the day, the cooler was empty. I hadn't made any money, but I had made something more important, a connection. I had given them a taste of the past, and it had given them a reason to believe in the creamery's future. That first taste of success was the spark. The next week, people came back, and this time they brought money. I started a small delivery service to the general store and the diner. Word of mouth spread. People from neighboring towns started driving to Northwood just to buy my ice cream. I was working 16-hour days, pasteurizing milk, churning ice cream, washing equipment, and making deliveries in a beat-up old truck I'd bought for a few $100s. It was the hardest I had ever worked in my life, and I had never been happier. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a creator. I was the proprietor of the Cold Hollow Creamery. That name, which had once seemed like a burden, now felt like a badge of honor. I was Arthur Miles's grandson, and I was continuing his legacy. As the business grew, I was able to hire a part-time employee, a high school kid from town who needed a summer job. The silence of the creamery was replaced by the sounds of work, of music playing on a small radio, of laughter. The place was alive again. But the past wasn't entirely gone. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was tall, with slicked-back gray hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Leo Miles?" he asked, extending a hand. "My name is Robert Vance. I'm with North Ridge Development." I didn't shake his hand. "I know who you are," I said. "I was told my offer was rejected," he said, his smile tightening. "I came to make you a new one. $200,000. Cash." It was a staggering amount of money. It was a test. "The answer is still no," I said, my voice even. He laughed, a condescending sound. "Son, be realistic. You're making ice cream in a shed. This is a real future. Don't let some misplaced sentimentality ruin your life." "This place isn't about sentimentality," I told him, looking him straight in the eye. "It's my home. It's my business. And it's not for sale. Not at any price." He stared at me for a long moment, his mask of civility slipping. I could see the predator underneath. He was used to getting his way, He wasn't used to a kid from a group home telling him no. He finally just shook his head, got back in his car, and drove away, spraying gravel in his wake. I watched him go, my heart pounding. I had faced the vulture, and I hadn't flinched. I had won. I had protected my grandfather's legacy. That evening I sat in the office, the lights of the creamery glowing around me. I took out the last of my grandfather's letters, the one I had saved for this moment. "Leo," it said, "if you are reading this, it means you did it. You fought for this place. You brought it back to life. I knew you had it in you. The strength I see in you comes from a long line of people who knew how to build things that last. This creamery is yours now, not because I gave it to you, but because you earned it. You have turned my greatest mistake into your greatest victory. What you do with it now is up to you. Build a good life, son. Be a good man. That is the only inheritance that truly matters. I am proud of you. Love, your grandfather." The letter was stained with a few teardrops by the time I finished. They weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of gratitude. I had an inheritance after all. It wasn't the building, or the money, or the recipes. It was the strength I had found inside myself. It was the connection to a family I thought I'd lost. It was the chance to build a home, not from bricks and mortar, but from purpose and community. The story doesn't end there, of course. That was just the beginning. Over the next few years, the Cold Hollow Creamery grew. I started making cheese, using the old family recipes. I hired more people from town. We built a small storefront where people could come and sit, eat ice cream, and look out over the river. The creamery became the heart of the community again, a place of pride for a town that had been slowly fading. It became a destination. But more than that, it became my home. I was no longer Leo Miles, file number 734. I was Leo Miles, the owner of the creamery. I had a place where I belonged. I had a family, not of blood, but of choice. Dale, Hank, my employees, my customers. I had a history that I had reclaimed, and a future that I was building with my own 2 hands. Sometimes, late at night, when the work is done and the machines are quiet, I walk through the creamery floor. I run my hand over the old wooden churn, the heart of this place, and I feel a profound sense of peace. I think about the journey that brought me here, the fear, the loneliness, the impossible choice. And I realize that my grandfather gave me something far more valuable than a piece of property. He gave me a reason to fight. He taught me that an inheritance isn't something you're given, it's something you claim. Maybe you've inherited something that felt more like a burden than a gift. A debt, a difficult history, a broken home, a story you didn't ask for. But what I learned in the dust and silence of this place is that the real inheritance is the strength you find when you decide to fix it, when you decide to build, when you choose to turn a ruin into a home. It's not about forgetting the past, it's about honoring it by building a better future. That's the hardest work there is, but it's the only work that matters. If this story meant something to you, if it resonated with a struggle or a choice in your own life, please subscribe and become part of this community. We're all just trying to make sense of the hand we were dealt. And in the comments below, I want you to tell me about something you're building. It doesn't have to be a business or a building. It can be a relationship, a skill, a new life for yourself. Tell me what you're fighting for. I want to hear about it, because your story matters, and we're all in this together.